trapped in the shimmering glow of an extravagant gala. Alexander Donovan gazed upon the polished floors, reflecting his lavish wealth. A self-made billionaire with a reputation for arrogance, he prided himself on conquering every obstacle. Little did he know, a humble janitor working behind the scenes would soon shake the foundation of his carefully orchestrated empire. Beneath her unassuming uniform and quiet demeanor lay secrets powerful enough to unravel. Alexander's fortune and pride in one fell swoop. In this twisted tale of deception and redemption, discover how one moment of cruelty can transform the fate of two vastly different lives forever. Alexander Donovan was the epitome of modern success. At 43 years old, he had built a business empire spanning international trade, real estate, and luxury retail. He exuded confidence, strutting from stage to stage at financial conferences, touting that he had risen from humble beginnings. Rumors persisted that he had inherited a small fortune from an uncle, but Alexander never acknowledged those whispers. In his public narrative, he was the hero of his own story, a man who had clawed his way up from nothing to become a billionaire. His charismatic smile and compelling speeches captivated thousands. That night, an exclusive charity gala took place at the opulent Highgarden Hotel, one of the most luxurious venues in the heart of New York City. Luminaries from the tech world, fashion icons, and philanthropic giants gathered under cascading chandeliers and plush velvet draperies. Alexander, of course, was among them, robed in a custom-tailored Brioni suit. His presence alone commanded attention, not merely because of his wealth, but because he had cultivated a persona of overwhelming grandeur. Servers bustled around the hall, weaving between VIP guests with trays of champagne. The event boasted a silent auction whose proceeds would go to a cause championed by some philanthropic institution. Alexander barely remembered which cause. To him, these soirees were more about the spectacle than the purpose. He had no problem writing a large check if it meant more photo ops and press coverage. His eyes scanned the glittering crowd until they caught sight of a woman in a simple uniform of navy blue pants and a neatly pressed white polo shirt. Her hair was tied back in a low ponytail, and she was pushing a large janitorial cart with cleaning supplies. Her gaze never met anyone else's. She paused only to mop up a small spill near the entrance, making sure no one slipped on the marble floor. Alexander's lips curled in mild disgust. At these events, everything was supposed to be about luxury and polish. The presence of staff in plain sight irritated him, especially a janitor who didn't fit the refined aesthetic. The woman had no name tag and seemed to avoid eye contact with every individual who glided past her. He didn't recognize it yet, but something about this janitor flickered within his line of vision and refused to fade. A quiet grace belied her simple attire. She moved with practiced efficiency, her footsteps light and quiet. He heard the faint sound of his friend and business partner, Timothy Barnes, approaching from behind, adjusting his crisp, black tuxedo. Timothy was a man with a serious demeanor and a deep respect for Alexander, though he often disapproved of Alexander's condescension. "You're staring, Alex," Timothy said quietly, nodding toward the janitor. Alexander gave a slight shrug. "I'm merely observing. It's strange to see someone doing menial tasks out in the open. This is supposed to be a black tie affair. The management should know better." Timothy, who came from a modest background, offered a half smile. "Even events like these can be messy, and people like her make it run smoothly." Alexander waved a dismissive hand. "I know, but there's a reason they should remain behind the scenes. Now, where's that man from the New York Times I'm supposed to speak with?" Timothy sensed a shift in Alexander's mood. "He's over by the bar. Shall we?" They made their way across the gleaming marble floor, the conversation about the janitor forgotten for the moment. Yet, no matter how many people complimented Alexander on his philanthropic generosity or tried to engage him in strategic alliances, his gaze meandered back toward the woman pushing that janitorial cart. She had disappeared for a moment, replaced by the swirling sea of black gowns, white tuxedo shirts, and glittering jewelry. Alexander shrugged it off. As far as he was concerned, she was just another staff member serving his convenience. Sophia Brooks was unlike most janitors. Her decision to work for the Highgarden Hotel was not born from financial desperation. She did not hold that job to merely get by. In fact, she hailed from a lineage of extraordinary wealth, though she never flaunted it. Her late grandfather, Charles Brooks, was a legendary entrepreneur in the textile industry and had left behind a fortune. Instead of stepping comfortably into the role of a socialite or business heiress, Sophia chose anonymity. She knew the emptiness of wealth without purpose, having seen relatives and acquaintances squander fortunes and integrity alike. It was not the first time she had heard about Alexander Donovan. Rumors of his arrogance were well known, though the media painted him in a flattering light: a brilliant mind, an ambitious leader, a philanthropist whose checks built hospitals and sponsored scientific research. Sophia was never one to trust mere headlines. She'd encountered enough wealthy individuals who hid behind philanthropic activities solely to boost their public images. Indeed, the Brooks family had once contributed to a joint venture with Alexander's foundation, but she had kept her identity and personal involvement carefully disguised. Standing in the corner of the grand ballroom with a mop in hand, she observed Alexander's interactions. There was a time, perhaps in her rebellious college years, when she might have called him out in public for his snide remarks or arrogance. But time and wisdom had taught her that confrontation rarely changed closed minds. Instead, she watched, gleaning insights into his character from the dismissive flicker in his eyes whenever a server or staff member walked by. A small voice in her mind wondered if he would recognize her. They had never formally met, but there was a chance he might recognize her from society event photos. Her image had graced a few tabloids whenever she had accompanied her grandfather to high-profile fundraisers. She hoped her new look, shorter, simpler hair, minimal makeup, would be enough to keep her identity concealed. In her quest to understand humanity and find meaning, Sophia had decided to spend a month working in positions that were typically undervalued. She wanted to know how it felt to be unappreciated, to be treated as invisible by the wealthy. Years of seeing how maids, security guards, and janitors were dismissed at parties opened her eyes to an entire universe of overlooked souls. Her job at Highgarden Hotel had already awakened new perspectives. The staff were hard-working, genuine, and often carrying hidden burdens. The hush of the corner allowed her to study Alexander's posture more closely. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a meticulously groomed complexion that only money could buy. He glided from group to group, greeting each donor or influential figure with a dazzling smile. But it was the fleeting moments in between these interactions that told the true story. Whenever he thought no one was watching, his face would fall into a taut expression of boredom or, worse, disdain. For a moment, she locked eyes with him from across the room. An inexplicable tension rippled through her chest, as though the humiliating remark she suspected he would eventually hurl at her was already forming on his lips. She dropped her gaze and focused on tidying a corner table to avoid confrontation. Her mind drifted back to her grandfather's advice: judge people by how they treat those they think cannot help or hurt them. She had adopted that creed as her own. Alexander, for all his philanthropic endeavors, seemed to fail that test at every turn. Yet, rather than letting a single first impression define her judgment, Sophia resolved to watch him further. Perhaps beneath that arrogant facade there was a wounded soul or a spirit that merely needed guidance. She sighed, thinking about how easily life could place a person on a pedestal if they had the right combination of charm and resources. The rest of society bowed and scraped, hoping for a golden opportunity or a trickle-down benefit. It occurred to her that if Alexander Donovan's empire was as grand as rumors suggested, he must have begun somewhere, perhaps once a humble soul with big dreams. She wondered what had molded him into this man who stared down at others from such a lofty perch. For now she kept her head down, carrying out her routine tasks. In the fluorescent lit hallways behind the main event, chefs and service staff bustled. Her manager, Derek Ryan, gave her an approving nod as she wheeled her cart toward the next cleaning station. Tonight, she thought, was only the beginning. She had no clue the path her life would take once Alexander Donovan decided he'd had enough of seeing her out in the open. But she had a feeling it wouldn't be pretty, and she was determined to endure whatever came next. The gala wore on. Glittering laughter and subdued orchestras filled the air, swirling in tandem with idle chatter about stock markets, technology trends, and philanthropic breakthroughs. A legendary cellist performed a solo piece on stage, prompting a hush over the audience. Alexander listened half-heartedly, checking the time on his diamond-encrusted watch. A short while later, the lights brightened and an MC took the stage to announce the results of the silent auction. There were polite cheers for each philanthropic donation, each painting or rare sculpture that had been sold to the highest bidder. When Alexander's name was mentioned for his record-breaking contribution to the city's scholarship program, he received a round of applause. He waved it off with feigned humility, yet inwardly glowed at the recognition. At the event's conclusion, guests began filtering out into the main foyer and lounge area. Some lingered, sipping the last of their drinks, engaging in final networking chats. Alexander was about to leave when he noticed that same janitor Sophia quietly scrubbing a stubborn stain by the entrance. Driven by an odd mix of curiosity and irritation, he approached her. "You there?" he said, voice tinged with that undeniable pomp. "Why on earth are you cleaning this up now? People are still walking through. Can't you do this when the floor is clear?" Sophia glanced up, meeting his gaze. She recognized this moment as one of those times her grandfather had warned her about, a test of someone's true character. She could see the disdain in Alexander's eyes. She chose her words carefully. "I'm sorry, sir. A guest spilled some wine here, and I wanted to make sure no one slips." Alexander let out a short, derisive laugh. "That's what the hazard signs are for, yes? You're in the way, and your mop is hardly a welcome sight." Sophia felt her chest tighten, but she kept her expression calm. "I'll try to be as quick as possible." Timothy Barnes, who was just a few steps behind Alexander, attempted to steer his friend away. "Alex, let's go. Don't worry about it." But Alexander brushed Timothy off. "No, no, this is a matter of principle. The High Garden Hotel is a place of luxury. The staff should have the decorum to not intrude upon the guest's experience." He then turned his narrowed gaze on the janitor's cart. "And what's your name?" "Sophia," she said, her eyes steady but polite. "Well, Sophia," he said, enunciating each syllable, "I expect better next time. Do you understand?" Sophia drew a deep breath. This was precisely the sort of arrogance she had witnessed from many wealthy individuals. Yet, despite his cutting words, she offered a polite nod. "Yes, sir, I understand." Without another word, Alexander pivoted and strode away. Timothy threw an apologetic glance in Sophia's direction, but he too left to follow his friend. Once the guests had cleared out, Sophia took a moment to compose herself in an empty hallway near the service elevators. Her heart pounded with a blend of frustration and pity. She had been around arrogance before, but something about Alexander's tone unsettled her. He was exceedingly smug, like a man convinced he sat on top of the world. Unbeknownst to Sophia, one of the banquet servers, Katrina Flores, overheard the entire exchange from around the corner. Katrina was a friendly sort, always ready to stand up for the staff. She approached Sophia afterward. "Girl, you handled that so well. I saw the look on his face. If it had been me, I'm not sure I could have stayed quiet." Sophia forced a small smile. "You get used to it, I guess." Katrina shook her head. "It's not right. He's so full of himself. Anyway, the night's almost over. Let's grab a coffee once we're done cleaning here. You could use a break." Sophia nodded, still lost in thought. The puzzle of Alexander Donovan intrigued her. For all the wealth and success he had garnered, there remained a hollowness in his interactions, almost as though the affection and respect he commanded was coerced or purchased. She tried to recall if she had ever come across him at philanthropic lunches or business gatherings in her real identity. If she had, their paths hadn't truly crossed until now. In that moment, she resolved to treat him exactly as he treated her, albeit with decency. His arrogance couldn't shake her. She had faced corporate titans and cunning investors who made Alexander look like a novice. If he believed he had the final word in this story, he was mistaken. To truly understand Alexander Donovan, one had to journey back to his youth. Born in the small town of Wyndham Falls, he'd grown up in a dilapidated two-bedroom house. His father worked at a local factory, while his mother held a part-time job cleaning offices. Alexander's earliest memories involved the dull ache of wanting things he couldn't have: brand-name sneakers, the newest toys, or even fresh produce from the supermarket. Instead, he often wore second-hand clothes and made do with whatever the family could afford. When Alexander was 14, his father died in an industrial accident. The small settlement from the factory provided a modest sum, but nowhere near enough to elevate them. His mother became the family's lone provider, taking on more cleaning jobs. Alexander watched her come home exhausted, scrubbing toilets, while the wealthy executives who employed her barely acknowledged her existence. Back then, he told himself he would one day ensure his mother never had to kneel on a filthy floor again. In high school, Alexander was bright but rebellious. He saw wealth as the ticket to freedom. When he earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university, he seized every advantage, joining clubs, networking with influential alumni, and even charming older donors into granting him access to circles typically out of reach for a poor kid. Over time, he became obsessed with the pursuit of money and clout. He interned at top investment banks, saving every penny and forging relationships with people who could open doors. By graduation, he had a job offer at a renowned hedge fund, beginning a meteoric rise in finance. But along the way, the values he'd once held faded under a relentless spotlight of greed. Hard work turned into ruthless ambition. Humility evolved into condescension. Before long, the boy who vowed to protect his mother from indignity was now subjecting others to it. Her memory lingered, but he had walled it off behind opulent mansions, lavish vacations, and extravagances few could imagine. Now, as Alexander rode in his private limo after the gala, memories of his past fluttered at the edges of his consciousness. He stared out the window at homeless individuals clustered around a steam vent on the sidewalk. A part of him felt a jolt of discomfort, a fleeting pang of recognition, but he quickly drowned it beneath scoffs and rationalizations. They should work harder, he told himself. After all, if he could do it, so could they. He arrived at his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The minimalist interior design, expansive windows, polished marble floors, curated art pieces was the exact opposite of the humble home he had once known. A butler greeted him, prepared to take his coat. Alexander stripped off his suit jacket and slumped into a plush chair. Timothy arrived a few minutes later, letting himself in with a keycard. He found Alexander swirling a glass of whiskey, gaze distant. "You can't stand the sight of people cleaning floors, can you?" Timothy joked in a half-hearted attempt to lighten the mood. Alexander let out a humorless chuckle. "I worked hard to get where I am. I have the right to enjoy these events without scruffy staff parading around in the middle of a gala." Timothy took a seat on the couch across from him. "You know, that staff is the backbone of these places. Without them, the High Garden would collapse. Don't you remember that your mother?" Alexander slammed the glass onto the side table, whiskey sloshing over the rim. Just don't." An uneasy silence filled the room. Timothy, well aware of the landmine he had nearly stepped on, cleared his throat. "Look, I'm just saying, you've come so far from where you started. Maybe show a bit more compassion. It's not weakness. It's human decency." Alexander closed his eyes, leaning his head back. For a moment, he seemed like a person carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, someone uncertain if all this wealth and glory was worth the sacrifice of his own soul. But the feeling passed as quickly as it arrived. The phone on the marble coffee table buzzed. Alexander checked it, read a message, and then smirked. "I have a new real estate deal that just got approved in Seattle. A developer wants me to invest in a high-rise that'll overshadow everything else downtown. This is perfect. We'll finalize the details tomorrow." Timothy recognized the shift business mode. The conversation about compassion evaporated, replaced by the more familiar territory of profits and expansions. He nodded. "All right, we'll get the lawyers and bankers on it. Let's aim for a quick closing." Unbeknownst to either of them, a quiet storm was brewing. They had no inkling that the janitor Alexander humiliated that evening was far from ordinary. Nor did they imagine how deeply their lives would be intertwined in the weeks to come. Alexander had always believed that money and connections were the only real power in the world. But soon he would be forced to confront a truth that his prideful heart could scarcely conceive. A few days later, as fate would have it, Alexander found himself back at the High Garden Hotel. This time, it was for a private meeting with a high-profile investor from Japan, Mr. Saito, who preferred the discreet luxury of the hotel's VIP suite. Alexander arrived early, wanting to review the meeting agenda in the lounge. As he settled into a plush armchair, sipping a latte, his eyes wandered around the lobby. To his surprise, he spotted Sophia. She was carefully wiping down the large windows, her uniform neatly pressed as before. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He'd forgotten about her. In the swirl of deals and personal amusements, the janitor was hardly worth remembering. But seeing her again reminded him of the encounter at the gala. He could have simply ignored her. Yet something compelled him to engage. He approached the window she was cleaning, arms folded. "You're still here, I see." Sophia paused, cloth in hand, meeting his gaze. "Yes, sir. The job's not done yet." Alexander gave her a sideways glance. "I don't know how long you've been a janitor, but if you aspire to move up in this establishment, you might consider working behind the scenes where you're not distracting the guests." Sophia recognized his veiled criticism. "I appreciate the advice." She was about to turn back to her task, but Alexander continued, "Apparently not done. Don't you want something better for yourself? Or is this the pinnacle of your ambition?" The corners of Sophia's mouth tightened imperceptibly. "Better is subjective, sir. Some people measure success in money, others in happiness or purpose." He scoffed. "Happiness doesn't pay bills. That's the language of people who can't afford to dream bigger." Sophia took a deep breath, her eyes drifting over his expensive watch and impeccably tailored suit. "He's not the only one who can afford these things," she thought, but kept it to herself. "We all have different paths, Mr. Donovan." Her measured, almost serene response unsettled him. She wasn't cowed, Instead, she regarded him with an underlying sense of calm, as though she was the one with the upper hand. "Good luck with those windows," he said, and with a dismissive turn, left her to her work. When Alexander finally ascended to the VIP suite for his meeting, Mr. Sayato was awaiting him. The Japanese investor was an elegant man in his 50s, polished, poised, and known for his discerning nature. After exchanging pleasantries, they sat at a glass table, their assistants handing them documents to sign. The mood was positive, though Mr. Saito was more subdued than Alexander had anticipated. As they began reviewing the contract details, the topic shifted to philanthropic partnerships. Alexander was eager to highlight his generosity. He believed such gestures made deals more appealing. Mr. Saito adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Yes, I have seen your donation to the Donovan Scholarship Fund. I also recall your name linked to the Caldwell Brooks Foundation. Is that correct?" Alexander paused. He recognized the Caldwell Brooks Foundation as one of the largest philanthropic entities in the country, known for supporting educational initiatives and environmental conservation. He had once submitted a joint proposal to them, but it was declined, an embarrassing moment he seldom spoke of. "That was a few years ago," Alexander replied, forcing a pleasant smile. "We had some differences in approach." Mr. Saito nodded. "I ask because I know some people at Caldwell Brooks. Remarkable organization. They have a legendary family behind them. The late Charles Brooks was quite the visionary." Alexander shrugged it off. "Yes, well, visionary or not, the project we proposed together didn't go far. Some of those philanthropic families can be idealistic." The conversation moved on, focusing on the real estate market, but the mention of Caldwell Brooks left an unsettling residue in Alexander's mind. He'd always felt overshadowed by their philanthropic clout. Every major philanthropist worth their salt had once tried to collaborate with Caldwell Brooks because of their unwavering devotion to high-impact ventures. Few succeeded. The foundation was notoriously picky, emphasizing ethics and sustainability. The fact that they turned down one of Alexander's proposals felt, to him, like a personal slight. After an hour, Mr. Sayato confirmed his intention to move forward with the investment. Documents were signed, and the future of a new Seattle skyscraper seemed bright. Alexander escorted Mr. Saito to the hallway, where the investors' aides waited. On their way, they passed Sophia again, who was now cleaning the polished floor near an indoor fountain. Mr. Saito gave a courteous bow in her direction, acknowledging her presence. Sophia responded with a gentle smile. Alexander found the exchange peculiar. Many wealthy people wouldn't deign to notice a janitor, let alone greet them so respectfully. When Mr. Saito left, Alexander lingered, studying Sophia out of the corner of his eye. Something about her presence nagged at him, like a half-forgotten melody. He chalked it up to the frustration of seeing a menial worker present in such high-profile areas. With a final glance, he headed to the elevator and descended to the lobby, mind already racing with the next business plan. But behind that facade, an unnerved curiosity was taking root, one he could neither articulate nor dismiss. 2 days later, Sophia finished her shift and changed out of her janitorial uniform. She slipped into a simple black dress and walked out of the High Garden Hotel without drawing attention. She headed to a nearby cafe where she'd arranged to meet her friend and former college classmate, Denise Kim. Denise was one of the few people who knew Sophia's true identity and motivations. She worked as a consultant at the Caldwell Brooks Foundation and often kept Sophia updated about developments within the philanthropic world. She greeted Sophia with a warm hug. "Hey, how's the undercover gig?" Denise asked as they settled at a small table by the window. Sophia shrugged, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "It's revealing, that's for sure. I've learned more about people's character in a few weeks than I have in years of board meetings." Denise took a sip of her cappuccino. I bet. Any interesting run-ins? Sophia's expression turned thoughtful. Remember that businessman, Alexander Donovan? Denise's eyes flickered with recognition. Oh, sure, the foundation had some dealings with him. Ambitious, but he never struck me as a man who truly cared about social impact, more about polishing his public image. Sophia exhaled slowly. He confronted me during a gala while I was mopping the floor, then again in the hotel lobby. He can't stand seeing a janitor out in the open, apparently, and he seemed almost triggered by my presence. Denise frowned. That's Alexander. From what I've heard, he's rumored to have a massive chip on his shoulder. The foundation once turned down a joint project with him. It was more like a PR stunt than genuine philanthropy. Sophia drummed her fingers on the table, recalling Alexander's demeanor. I'm starting to see that, but I wonder, there's something else there, some hidden pain or memory. He mentioned once that his mother was a cleaner. It's like he despises any reflection of his past. Denise nodded. That makes sense. I'm not excusing his behavior, but some people bury their trauma in arrogance. By the way, the Foundation's annual summit is next month in Chicago. I'm going to be there, and so will a lot of top donors. You should come as yourself, Sophia Brooks, especially since your presence is always welcome. Are you planning to reveal who you are to Alexander? Sophia shook her head. I'm not sure. The last thing I want is to embarrass him out of spite. But I also can't stand how he mistreats people like they're beneath him. I took this job to gain insight, and I'm getting plenty. I'm thinking of stepping away soon, but part of me wants to see if there's a lesson to be taught, if he's capable of growth. Denise placed a reassuring hand on Sophia's. If anyone can handle it, it's you. You've always seen the good in people. Just be cautious. Alexander Donovan is powerful, and his pride is as tall as his skyscrapers. Sophia finished her coffee, gazed distant as she reflected on the power dynamics swirling around them. Despite her family's enormous wealth, her heart had always been bent on understanding life from different perspectives. She had spent months volunteering at homeless shelters and orphanages. This stint as a hotel janitor was one more exploration into the hidden corridors of humanity. She stood to leave. Thanks for the talk, Denise. Keep me posted on the summit details. And if you hear anything else about Alexander or his businesses, let me know. I have a feeling this story is just beginning. They parted ways, each carrying the weight of unspoken possibilities. As Sophia made her way home, she mulled over how quickly Alexander dismissed people he considered lower than himself. It was a stark contrast to her grandfather's ethos of using wealth for the betterment of all. That night, she resolved to stay in her current role a little longer. She wanted to see if there was any glimmer of redemption within Alexander Donovan, any chance he might recall the humility life had once forced upon him. Meanwhile, Alexander was riding a wave of success. Mr. Saito had committed a substantial investment to the Seattle project, and rumors circulated about another major venture in Singapore. For Alexander, life couldn't have been better. He often boasted to Timothy that in a few years, Donovan Enterprises would surpass the net worth of many established family dynasties. His dream was not simply to be wealthy, but to become a titan whose name was etched in the annals of commerce. One afternoon, Timothy approached Alexander in their sleek corporate office. Through the expansive windows, New York City sprawled like a mosaic of ambition. Alexander, we have a few philanthropic invitations that might be worth considering, Timothy said, placing a small stack of embossed envelopes on the glass table, including one from Caldwell Brooks. They're hosting a summit in Chicago. Alexander's face hardened at the mention of Caldwell Brooks. I have no interest in attending events hosted by them. They snubbed me once, remember? Timothy cleared his throat. I remember, but times change, and business alliances can shift. Their influence is huge, and attending might open doors for our future expansions. Alexander picked up the invitation, scanning the finely printed text. "The Caldwell Brooks Foundation cordially invites you." He read aloud, trailing off with a scoff. He threw it back on the table. "Send a polite decline." Timothy hesitated. "Are you sure? They might interpret that as an insult." "I don't care," Alexander snapped. "I owe them nothing." Timothy sighed, gathering the envelopes. Before he left, he thought to mention something that had been circulating among the staff at the High Garden. "By the way, have you heard any rumors about that janitor you confronted?" "Her name's Sophia, I believe." Alexander frowned. "Why would I hear anything about a janitor? She's been seen in areas typically restricted to executive staff. Some say she speaks multiple languages fluently. There's speculation that she might not be who she seems." Alexander's brow furrowed. "Speculation from whom?" Timothy shrugged. "Just chatter among the employees. The hotel's manager mentioned it in passing. She has impeccable manners, apparently. Some suspect she's from a wealthy family, doing research or something like that." Alexander let out a mirthless laugh. "That's absurd. People dream up all sorts of fantasies about themselves. She's probably just an over-educated grad who couldn't find a better job." Timothy gave him a pointed look. "Just thought you might want to know. You seemed fixated on her. She's a minor irritation, nothing more," Alexander insisted. But the notion of a janitor who might be wealthy, or at least well-educated, gnawed at him. He hated the idea of not knowing someone's true position in the social hierarchy. In his world, clarity was key. One either had power or did not. At the end of the day, after the staff had gone home, Alexander found himself alone in the office's lounge area. He poured a small measure of whiskey, letting the silence envelop him. His thoughts wandered to the battered living room of his childhood, to the heartbreak in his mother's eyes when she returned from scrubbing floors for the wealthy. That memory conflicted with his current disdain for service workers. As he stared at the city lights, an unbidden question arose. What if this Sophia is actually someone of significance? Would it matter to me? He quickly dismissed the thought. Power recognized power. If she were truly influential, she wouldn't be mopping hotel floors. That was the logic he clung to, ignoring the kernel of doubt that had lodged in his chest. Yet in the quiet hush, he felt an unease that wouldn't relent. For all his business acumen, Alexander sensed a story unfolding that he couldn't control. He wondered if, in some cosmic game of chess, this unremarkable janitor might become a threat to his carefully orchestrated life. He finished his drink in a single gulp and left the office. Sleep came late that night, troubled by dreams of spilled wine on polished floors and a watchful gaze that silently judged his every step. Sophia was tidying the hotel's grand foyer early one morning when she spotted Alexander and Timothy stepping off the elevator. It was unusual for Alexander to be there so early, dressed in casual attire, dark jeans, and a tailored blazer instead of a full suit. Perhaps he was conducting some discreet inspection or meeting with the hotel's executives. She moved to the side, trying to appear inconspicuous. Then, to her surprise, Timothy caught her eye and gave a brief nod of acknowledgement. It was subtle but respectful, a stark contrast to Alexander's stony indifference. However, Alexander noticed Timothy's gesture. His gaze snapped to Sophia, lingering for a moment as though recognizing that Timothy had just shown her more courtesy than he ever had. Unable to resist, Alexander approached. "You're here early," he remarked, voice devoid of warmth. Sophia paused her work, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Yes, sir. The morning shift starts at 6. Timothy gave Alexander a meaningful look, silently cautioning him not to make a scene. But Alexander pressed on, as if searching for something to reaffirm his superiority. "You look different today." Sophia wondered if he had noticed that her hair was pinned up more elegantly or that she carried herself with a certain poise. She merely offered a polite smile. "I'm still the same person, sir. Just doing my job." He studied her, taking in the neatness of her attire, the subtle confidence she radiated. Something about her eyes made him think she was laughing at him on the inside. The notion infuriated him. "I hope you're not planning to distract the guests again. We have an important conference here this afternoon. I'll stay out of the way," she answered, unwavering. Timothy intervened. "Alexander, we're going to be late. Let's go." With that, Alexander tore his gaze away, and they proceeded toward a set of conference rooms. Sophia returned to her tasks, a soft exhale escaping her. Every time they crossed paths, he seemed more confrontational, as though her composure alone was a rebuke to his ego. Later that day, while Sophia was taking out the trash behind the hotel, she noticed Timothy leaning against the alley wall, checking his phone. He looked tired, as though dealing with perpetual stress. When he saw her, he gave a small wave. She hesitated, then walked over. "Long day?" He nodded, slipping his phone into his pocket. "We've been in back-to-back meetings. Mr. Donovan's on edge lately." Sophia leaned on the handle of her trash cart. "I see. Maybe he's worried about business matters." Timothy's gaze flicked toward the door Alexander had entered earlier, partly, but there's also some personal stuff. He's a complicated man. Sophia thought of her father's frequent advice. Sometimes the most arrogant people are the loneliest. She regarded Timothy curiously. "You're his friend, right?" Timothy managed a faint smile. "We've known each other for years, since college. I've seen him at his best and worst. Sometimes I don't recognize the boy who used to dream of a better life for his mother." Sophia's chest tightened. She was reminded again that arrogance is rarely born. In a vacuum, it often grows from pain and fear. "Is she still around?" Timothy shook his head. "She passed away a few years ago. Cancer. I think losing her pushed him deeper into this relentless pursuit of money and control. He can't stand being reminded of the past, especially the poverty he came from." Sophia sighed softly. "That explains some things." Timothy studied her, an unspoken question in his eyes. "You're different, aren't you? Not just another janitor." For a long moment, Sophia weighed her options. She could brush it off or tell him at least a fraction of the truth. In the end, she chose a middle path. "I'm here to learn, Mr. Barnes, that's all." Timothy opened his mouth to probe further, but a call from inside the hotel interrupted. He offered a quick goodbye and disappeared through the door. Left alone in the alley, Sophia felt a pang of sympathy for Alexander's journey. She despised how he treated people, yet she couldn't ignore the wounds fueling his behavior. As she made her way back inside, her mind churned with the question, could someone like Alexander Donovan be redeemed if confronted with the right circumstances? Or was he too far gone, consumed by the darkest sides of ambition? Gossip, like wildfire, spread through the High Garden staff over the next week. Some whispered that Sophia was the secret daughter of a European dignitary, working incognito to observe American capitalism. Others spun tales that she was a journalist gathering material for an expose on the exploitative practices of luxury hotels. A few insisted they had seen her slip into a limousine driven by a private chauffeur. Sophia remained unfazed. She performed her duties conscientiously, keeping her interactions minimal but respectful. Katrina, the friendly banquet server, watched the rumor mill with amusement. "You've become a celebrity around here," she teased Sophia one evening. Sophia responded with a light laugh. "Let them talk. Rumors don't define who I am," but the staff were not the only ones taking notice. Word reached the ears of the High Garden's top management that a certain janitor was eliciting unusual speculation. They conducted a discreet check of her background, but found nothing amiss. Her references were in order, her employment history innocuous. The managers shrugged it off, deciding it was just idle talk. Alexander, however, was not so easily satisfied. He had never liked mysteries. He pressed Timothy for more information. "I don't have any specifics," Timothy said, leaning back in the plush chair of Alexander's office. "I only know she's well-spoken and has a refined aura. Maybe she had a good education or a privileged upbringing." Alexander drummed his fingers on the desk. "Or maybe she's just a con artist. People will do anything for attention." Timothy tilted his head. "What would be the point? She hasn't asked for money or special treatment. She's just there." Alexander rose from his chair, restless. "I don't like it. That hotel is where I conduct business and entertain clients. The last thing I need is some unknown entity messing with my environment." Timothy bit back a retort. He remembered how Alexander once revered people who overcame hardship, who strove to better themselves. Now he seemed threatened by anyone he couldn't control. "Let it go, Alex. She's just a janitor. We have bigger deals to focus on." But Alexander couldn't let it go. In his world, every unknown was a liability. He found himself drifting back to the High Garden more frequently, under the guise of checking on conference arrangements or greeting out-of-town associates. Each time he made an excuse to wander the halls, hoping for another glimpse of Sophia. He watched her from a distance, puzzling over her graceful movements, her understated composure. She never flinched when he walked by. If anything, she seemed entirely unruffled by his presence. One afternoon, he confronted the hotel's manager, Derek Ryan, under the pretense of inquiring about staff performance. "That janitor, the one named Sophia," Alexander said in a clipped tone. "Is she up to the hotel's standards?" Derek blinked, surprised at the question. "Sophia? Yes, sir. She's one of our best employees. Always on time, does excellent work, never any complaints." Alexander frowned. "No complaints? Really? You don't find it odd that she stands out so much?" Derek hesitated. "In what way, Mr. Donovan?" Alexander's voice took on a sharp edge. "She interacts with guests in a manner that's unusual for someone in her position." Derek weighed his response carefully. "I wouldn't say that. She's just polite and well-spoken. Some guests appreciate that. Is there a problem?" Alexander realized he was treading on thin ice. Accusing a respected employee without grounds could blow back on him. He forced a smile. "No problem at all. I was just curious. Keep an eye on her, Ryan. We can't be too careful." Derek nodded, though confusion lingered in his expression. As Alexander left the manager's office, his mood darkened. Why was he so invested in this? He told himself it was about control, about ensuring no scandal marred his business dealings. Deep down, he sensed something deeper, an irrational fear that the foundation of his success might be challenged by an unexpected force. Little did he know, events were lining up that would soon expose truths he had tried so hard to bury. And in that collision of secrets, Alexander Donovan would face the one thing he had avoided all his life, the mirror of his own conscience. A couple of weeks later, the hotel was bustling with activity for a high-profile socialites engagement party. The grand ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, soft pastel decor, and an opulent arrangement of orchids. Celebrities, dignitaries, and influential business magnates streamed into the venue, decked in designer gowns and tuxedos. Unsurprisingly, Alexander Donovan was among them. Invited by the bride-to-be's family, longtime associates, he arrived ready to mingle with the elite. Timothy trailed behind him, ever the faithful confidant, though he looked less enthusiastic about the evening's proceedings. Sophia, assigned to keep watch for spills and litter, quietly patrolled the edges of the ballroom. She caught sight of Alexander's arrival, but kept her distance. She had learned the art of invisibility, stepping aside whenever staff flitted about to refill drinks or pass hors d'oeuvre. As the night wore on, the crowd grew more relaxed. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed. Around 10 o'clock, the band struck up a lively tune, and couples took to the dance floor. Sophia lingered near the exit, ensuring no accidents occurred. That was when she felt a light tap on her shoulder. It was Katrina. "Sophia, can you help me in the corridor? Some guests are complaining about a spill near the elevator." "Sure," Sophia said. She followed Katrina out of the ballroom. In the corridor, they found a small group of guests chattering nervously. A tall man in a black suit was lying on the floor, evidently inebriated, with a broken champagne flute next to him. The spilled drink glistened on the marble tiles. The man groaned incoherently. Sophia immediately retrieved the wet floor sign from her cart and set it up. "Katrina, we should call for medical assistance, just in case." Katrina nodded and rushed off. Several onlookers hovered, uncertain how to help. Sophia knelt beside the man. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" He opened his bleary eyes, mumbling something about losing his balance. Without warning, he made a clumsy attempt to stand, nearly collapsing again. Instinctively, Sophia braced him, preventing him from hitting his head. Suddenly, a woman's shrill voice came from behind. "What is going on here?" Sophia turned to see the bride-to-be, a young socialite named Pamela Sinclair. She was flanked by a few guests, including Alexander Donovan. "He just fell," Sophia said calmly, helping the man onto a seat by the wall. "I think he's had too much to drink." Pamela looked mortified. "This is a disaster for my party." "Someone do something about this." Alexander stepped forward. "Let me help," he offered, pulling out his phone. "We'll get a doctor up here, or at least security to escort him somewhere safe." In that moment, the inebriated man recognized Alexander. "Donovan," he slurred. "Alexander Donovan. Big shot businessman, right?" Alexander stiffened, uncertain if he should respond. The man gave a delirious laugh. "I bet you think you're better than all of us." Sophia tried to calm the man. "You need to rest, sir." But he waved her away. "This is a fancy place, right? Why is a janitor telling me what to do?" Pamela rolled her eyes. "Exactly. Shouldn't you go mop somewhere else?" "Let real security handle this." At that, a flicker of annoyance crossed Sophia's features. She wasn't offended by the drunk's words, but Pamela's snide remark rubbed her the wrong way. Before she could respond, Katrina returned with a security guard. They carefully escorted the man to a private area where he could recuperate. Alexander lingered, eyes flicking between Sophia and the departing man. The tension in the hallway was palpable. Pamela, seeking someone to blame, whirled on Sophia. "Why didn't you keep an eye on him? Isn't it your job to maintain the floors and keep things orderly?" Sophia bit her tongue, staying polite. "I came as soon as I heard." Before the argument could escalate, Alexander cut in. "Pamela, calm down. The fault isn't the janitor's. The man clearly had too much to drink." Pamela huffed. "Whatever. I'm going back to my party. This better not ruin my night." With that, she stalked off, leaving Alexander and Sophia standing in the corridor. An awkward silence enveloped them. Finally, Alexander cleared his throat. "You handled that well," he admitted grudgingly. Sophia nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and for a split second, a strange empathy passed between them. Alexander saw the reflection of his own frustrations in her calm stare. He wondered if, perhaps, he had misjudged her. But just as quickly, he remembered the rumors, the mystery swirling around her. He couldn't quell his suspicion. If she was indeed someone else in disguise, why go through all this trouble? What was she after? He turned away. "I need to get back inside. Good night, Sophia." She watched him walk away, an odd pang in her chest. For all his arrogance, there was a fleeting gentleness in that moment, something she hadn't expected. It made her wonder if Alexander's callousness was a mask he wore to hide his own vulnerability. With the corridor cleared and the spill cleaned, Sophia returned to the staff area to wrap up her shift. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the darkness, oblivious to the human dramas unfolding within the gilded walls of the High Garden Hotel. Little did either of them know that the next encounter would cast aside all pretenses and that this final unveiling would come far too late for Alexander Donovan to protect everything he valued. It happened a week later. The Caldwell Brooks Foundation announced a last-minute press conference in New York City to showcase their latest philanthropic collaboration, a generous endowment for environmental research in partnership with the United Nations. The news created a buzz among the elite circles. Luminaries, journalists, and high-profile donors scrambled for an invitation. Sophia had taken a day off from her janitorial duties to attend the event in her true capacity. She arrived at the venue dressed in an elegant navy blue pantsuit, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo. Around her neck hung a simple pearl pendant, an heirloom from her grandfather, Charles Brooks. Stepping onto the dais, she joined Denise Kim and several foundation board members. To the public, she was Miss Sophia Brooks, granddaughter of the late Charles Brooks, and a driving force behind Caldwell Brooks' philanthropic strategies. Cameras clicked furiously. Reporters hurled questions. She answered them with poise, discussing the urgent need to protect oceans and forests, to invest in cleaner energy, to safeguard the planet for future generations. Meanwhile, Alexander Donovan had reluctantly agreed to show up at the press conference purely as a networking opportunity. He had no intention of forging alliances with Caldwell Brooks, but his PR team insisted that being seen at such events could boost his image. He arrived late, slipping into the back row with Timothy. "Let's make this quick," Alexander murmured, scanning the dais. He noticed familiar faces, foundation heads, famous environmentalists, and a few politicians. Then his gaze fell upon the woman speaking at the podium, the one with a commanding yet graceful presence. She looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place her at first. That was until the large screen behind her flashed her name, Sophia Brooks, Executive Committee member, Caldwell Brooks Foundation. Alexander's heart lurched into his throat. His eyes zeroed in on her face, analyzing every curve of her features, each nuance of her expression. In an instant, recognition slammed into him. That's Sophia, the janitor. The truth was irrefutable. The posture, the voice, the same calm eyes that had stared at him over a mop handle. Timothy also froze, mouth agape. That can't be. Alexander felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. A surge of humiliation and panic coursed through him. Memories of all their encounters, his sneering insults, the belittling remarks flashed like a damning slideshow. She's not some staff worker. She's the granddaughter of Charles Brooks, one of the wealthiest and most influential philanthropists in the world. Desperate to maintain composure, Alexander forced himself to stand. He moved quietly to the side of the room, clinging to the shadows as he watched her address the audience. She spoke eloquently about the foundation's commitments, about the partnerships they sought, about the profound responsibility that came with wealth. An occasional, subtle warmth lit her features, revealing her genuine passion for the cause. When she concluded, the room erupted in applause. Sophia stepped down from the podium, greeting a few supporters and shaking hands with dignitaries. She briefly conferred with Denise Kim, then moved toward the exit. Alexander, propelled by a swirl of shock and curiosity, rushed to intercept her. "Sophia." "Miss Brooks," he managed to say, voice a forced whisper. She turned, eyes widening slightly when she saw him. A beat of tense silence passed as a wave of emotions rippled across her face. Surprise, then sadness, then calm acceptance. "Mr. Donovan," she finally said, voice steady, though a touch cooler than before. Alexander's mind reeled. He struggled to find words. I had no idea. You were at the hotel, and she lifted a hand to gently stop his stammering. "Yes, I was. I took a position as a janitor because I wanted to understand firsthand how the staff are treated, how society often values appearances over substance. His cheeks burned with shame. Why would you do that? Sophia's gaze flickered with a trace of weariness, because power can blind people. Sometimes they forget kindness, empathy, and respect for others. I wanted to see how much of that I'd find in people who claim to be philanthropic leaders. It was eye-opening. Alexander swallowed hard, the humiliating weight of his memories pressing down on him. He recalled every unkind remark. "Listen," he said in a hushed tone, "I didn't know who you were. If I had known," Sophia's eyes hardened, "if you had known I was wealthy, you would have treated me differently. That's exactly the point. You shouldn't need to know someone's net worth to treat them with basic decency." He stood there, pinned by guilt. The arrogance that had defined him felt hollow, worthless. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, casting his gaze to the floor. She studied him for a moment, then nodded, as though acknowledging the apology. "I appreciate you saying that. But some things can't be undone with an apology." His eyes darted around, noticing the curious glances of a few onlookers. In desperation, he reached for her arm to pull her aside into a secluded corner. "Sophia, please," he whispered. "This can't be how we end things. Is there any way to salvage this?" "I'll do anything to make it right." She withdrew her arm gently but firmly. "Alexander, I'm not interested in retribution. I only want to see a world where people, regardless of their status, are treated with respect. If you truly wish to make amends, change how you treat others. Look in the mirror and decide who you really want to be." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the corridor. His mind reeled, grappling with an unfamiliar feeling, the sting of regret. Too late, he understood the value of the kindness he had so casually discarded. So ends the story of a wealthy man, humbled by the revelation of a woman he thought beneath him. Alexander Donovan learned, with brutal clarity, that power and wealth do not grant license to belittle others, and that destiny often conceals its greatest lessons in the most unassuming people. His empire, though vast, could not shield him from the quiet storm that toppled his pride. And Sophia Brooks, the so-called janitor, showed that true worth lies not in outward shows of success, but in the integrity and empathy that guide our actions. Thank you for joining us on this dramatic journey of pride, discovery, and redemption. If this story resonated with you, please support our channel by hitting that like button, sharing it with friends, and subscribing for more powerful, life-changing stories. Together, let's keep these lessons alive, reminding the world that compassion will always be the greatest wealth of all.